Hey guys, Travis with TCustomz Productions, TCustomz.com. Today I'm going to cover a topic I've covered in the past. Probably a couple of years ago I shot a video on this, but based on the current questions I've been getting from a lot of you, I wanted to go ahead and recover this topic, especially for some of the new subscribers. And it's also, I feel like it's good every so often just kind of revisit a topic. And the question is, what effects do you apply to your samples when you're working on a sample-based beat? I'm just going to confess right now, it's very simple. And if you've been following me for any stretch, you know that I don't apply a lot of crazy stuff. I primarily adhere to the KISS principle, to keep it simple, stupid. I don't try to overcomplicate things. Many times you can get in and start throwing plugins on. You don't really know what the plugins are doing, and you can do more damage to the audio in some cases than you can actually good. I'm not saying don't experiment, but I'm just saying for me personally, I just keep it very primitive, keep it very simple, and it gets the job done. So that's basically what I'm gonna do today. What effects do I apply to a sample? Now, if you follow my past videos, you know that I sample in Ableton Live. I've been using Ableton Live for many years, been sampling for probably 7 or 8 years. As you can see here, I already have an 8-bar sequence. This is actually an excerpt from a beat that I just recently released on the site. And so for those of you who don't know, this is a very simple slicing method to chop a sample in Ableton. I've covered that in the past video. I'll make sure to link that in the description in a 3-part series. Now, before I get into the audio effects that I apply to most of my sample-based beats, I just want to cover on a couple points that I've already touched on in part 2 of that How to Sample in Ableton Live 9 series, where I show you how to create what is called a custom slice preset. But these are a few of the controls that I am looking to manipulate once I've chopped the sample. Number 1 is this transpose. I show you how to easily set up these macros that are going to manipulate all of your sample chops at the same time in part 2 of that series. But that's the first thing, is I'm looking to maybe manipulate the pitch of the sample. So once I have my samples chopped, what else is really convenient and cool about these macros is that it's manipulating all of the samples at the same time. So it's actually transposing all these sample chops. So number 2 is the velocity attack. And this, just like I mentioned, is a quick fade in of your samples. And I go into more detail in part 2 of that video series as to why you may want to be looking at your attack, how it can help your sample-based beats. And the other quick thing that I go into more detail in that video is the choke group. And that's basically what that means, is when you trigger a sample, the existing sample that was playing automatically gets cut off. Yeah, I show you how to do that in that video. So I don't want to take much more time with that. But those, if you consider those effects, transpose, attack, and a choke group, first 3 preliminary things that I'm looking at that I make sure that is set up when I'm chopping my sample. And then next, as you may already see over here, this is really as simple as I keep it. Now, there are specialty cases, and I'll talk about here in just a minute, but for the most part, this is what I'm looking at. I'm looking at a filter. And you can even get fancy with it and throw in a multi-band EQ to manipulate frequencies. And as you can see on this particular sample, I have a 241 hertz cutoff, so I'm cutting off anything below 241 hertz. You know, I'm not going to tell you this is going to be the exact number for every track that you're working on. There are certain tracks that I've worked on that I have a threshold as high as 400 or 500 hertz. It really depends on what type of bass I'm going to put in, where my kick is hitting in the frequency spectrum, what other elements are going to be added to the track. It really depends. But one thing I will say that I see is very common in a lot of up-and-coming sample-based producers' beats that I hear, that they send me like, I think my mix is muddy, I'm having problems with this. In many cases, it sounds like they're not really bringing up the threshold on their filter enough, specifically when you're creating your own bass line to kind of fill up in here. If you have kind of a threshold that's still down maybe like 100 hertz, or maybe you don't even put a filter on it at all, and you wonder why the mix is muddy, I would encourage you and implore you to kind of experiment. And even if you think 200 hertz is enough, or 300, like, at least experiment with maybe bringing up the threshold on your filter or your EQ and just see how it sounds and how it works with your mix. Again, I like to keep it very simple. I don't like to add a lot of crazy effects to my samples typically. Many times it starts with a basic filter. You can feel free to use whatever filter you have. If you have your own particular plugins you like to use, this is just what's available in the Ableton Live suite. This comes standard with any full version of Live. And next is a little delay. Some sample-based producers like to have like the short, abrupt chops, and that's partly going to come down to preference. There are cases where I don't put a delay on some of my samples, but many times I'll put a very subtle delay. You can see the settings that I had on this particular sample. It will vary from beat to beat. And also keep in mind that your delays, depending on what delay you're using, it may work a little bit differently. It may be a little more sensitive on your feedback or your various settings. With a basic delay like this that I'm using, the 2-3 kind of gives an off delay. You may also experiment with a 2-2. a 2-4 or 4-4, or you may not need any kind of delay at all. But for me, what this does is it helps to marry my chops together very well and make them sound a little smoother, especially in the case when a sample stops maybe a little bit early. That extra delay can help fill in some of the empty space. So I wasn't lying. Like I said, I keep it very simple. I'm talking an EQ, filter, a delay. Now there are certain circumstances, and these are kind of nuances of when I'm trying to add like kind of like special effects, or have maybe dropouts and I'm trying to build some suspense, do some extra little sprinkles on the track. There may be a case where I bring in like say a ping pong delay, and the ping pong delay maybe I'll get into another video, maybe how you can use it and apply it. If you're interested, drop a comment, let me know. For me, the ping pong delay has just been experimentation. I really do like the ping pong delay in certain circumstances, but I wouldn't typically put a ping pong delay on every sample that's triggered throughout the entire track. This may be something I may automate. Let's say like for one sample chop at the end of every 8 bars, or a certain chop where there's a dropout and I want there to be a certain kind of extra stereo effect with my delay. Reverb is another good plugin that you can use from time to time. Now, depending on what audio you're starting with, you may want to start with some very subtle reverb, and it's going to be preference. But really, for the most part, I'll tell you guys, probably 99% of my tracks, 95 maybe, basically this guy right here. You got the audio filter, and you got a simple delay. It's my attack, my transpose to manipulate the pitch and speed of the sample, just making sure that my samples are chopping each other off. I'll just play you really quickly what this sample sequence sounds like with the audio filter enabled and the simple delay. In other very rare circumstances, depending on what audio that I'm working with, I may do some pre-compression on the sample. There's a lot of varying dynamics in the sample and I want to kind of constrain it and confine it. I may throw in some minor compression. It's nothing too crazy. It's finding good quality sounds. As far as chopping the samples and techniques for that, I may touch on some of those in the future. I think it just comes down to practice. I get a lot of questions also about like, how do you chop a sample? Like, what's the best approach? I don't think there's any best approach, but I think the better that you can get at chopping the sample, the easier it's going to make it for you when you get in and start looking to process it and actually coming up with your sample sequences. If you're starting with good quality samples and sounds, it's really not going to take a lot of additional tweaking and processing to make it sound good. So feel free to experiment, hopefully re-emphasizing these points, or for those of you who are just seeing this for the first time, talking about this has been helpful. If you have any other questions for me pertaining to music production, Ableton Live, coaching, anything like that, there'll be a place in the description where you can contact me directly through social media or through my email. And I'll also make sure to link all of the past Ableton Live tutorials I've uploaded in the description as well. I want to say thanks again for watching. If this video was helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe to the channel, stay inspired, happy beat making. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Rap steady slamming. Check out the technique. Give them that shit they been missing. I rock and hip hop. Came to conquer. Put it in the music. Rap steady slamming. Check out the technique. Give them that shit they been missing. Sicker than your average.